It's great to be with you in the live stream, and I am here with Christine Youn, right? How do you say it? Youn. I totally mess it up because I'm tired, because I know that's how it is. We've known each other forever. But Christine, great friend of mine, assistant DS in Northern California for the Church of the Nazarene, but very passionate about how we are trauma-informed people who care for others. So we are wise and discerning and thoughtful and loving in the ways that we care for others. So she is going to present a workshop for us today. And I'm going to get your thing right. Trauma-informed peace building practices for a polarized culture. And I don't know if there's a better workshop for us to be working through in these days, right? We all need some trauma informed. We all need to know how to be peace builders, peacemakers, and we definitely live in a polarized culture. So, Reverend Christine is going to lead us this morning. Remember, if you have questions or thoughts as they come up, you can add them into the chat, and we have people that will send them. So we will get them. And so there'll be a time of questions. That's how we're going to interact here. So that is for you. Just make sure if you have questions, again, just add them in that chat there for us, and we will pass those on to Christine, and you can hear her answer them.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you, Christine, for joining us.
I'm happy to be here and really excited to be talking to the Wesleyan Holiness Women Clergy community. So thank you. Well, I always like to start with scripture, kind of to couch our conversation with where we have our source of inspiration. And it's always the life and the living way of Jesus. So I want to show this one painting, and I love the fact that this is on your computer screens because you can kind of see the details more than if you're in a workshop setting face to face. But this is from John 19:25-27. This painting, however, let me introduce this first, was painted by Jacques Joseph James Tissot. And this painting is called The View from the Cross. And so if you notice at the very bottom of the painting, you see the feet of Jesus, nail-pierced feet. And so we can imagine Jesus looking out from hanging on the cross, and this is the scene that he could have seen. And so when we go to our scripture in John 19, this is why this is so profound. Because when you're standing on the cross, you're not just some bystander. You are actively engaged in what is happening in there, and it is all the sins and all the hurt and the brokenness of the world on his shoulders, his body holding so much suffering and so much pain. And this is what he says in the last hour before his death. It says in John 19, we read, "Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, 'Woman, here is your son.' Then he said to the disciple, 'Here is your mother.' And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home." And so, in the midst of the worst kind of suffering possible, Jesus, over the chaos and pain and trauma in his body, has this priority of tethering his loved ones together, to bring people together, to draw them together into this beloved community where there are ties that go deeper than blood. I love to start all of our conversations, whether it's one-on-one conflict resolution processes, or teaching on peace building, or teaching on trauma-informed content, to always start in the place where Jesus, our Lord, wants us to be in deep, authentic relationships of mutuality. So our theme, parakaleo, to come alongside, to encourage, to exhort. something to take in mind that it is the Spirit's work through us, especially in conflict. So I feel like we've had our share of conflict these days, maybe in our churches, maybe in our communities, maybe on social media. And it is not a part of our own nature to then encourage to come alongside people that are seemingly on opposing sides to what we hold dear to our hearts. It must be the work of the Spirit that works through us to give us the nature of kindness and goodness to come alongside others. So let's start with this reality. How many of you can empathize, that can relate to this kind of reality? We shepherd polarized congregations. We navigate theological tension. We hold generational and cultural divides. We lead systems that were not built with us in mind. Robbie, what do you think? One or two of these things? How many of these things do you relate to?
One or two? I think I relate to all four of those.
Yeah, I would agree. And I gave this workshop yesterday, and everybody's like lifting up all four fingers. Like, this is our shared reality. And especially as women clergy, we are leading in systems that were not built with us in mind, are we not? So, a trauma informed lens for mining conflict. So, to mine conflict is for discovering beneath the surface what is actually happening so that conflict becomes a site of deeper trust rather than deeper fracture. As the people of God, we are not to avoid conflict. Conflict is inevitable, but will we use conflict? And we could even say holy conflict to form people, for an opportunity to bring about deeper trust between relationships instead of giving into our instinct to fracture relationships, to be polarized. So, how do we mind conflict? Let's move to our Wesleyan Holiness tradition. We believe holiness is not withdrawal from the world. Holiness is love perfected in relationship. But that is a hard thing to do. It is so tempting to say, no, I am going to spend my time with like minded people, go into safe spaces. And that is natural. And it is good to have reprieve sometimes in tense spaces, to go and withdraw in safe spaces. But holiness is not a holy huddle with like minded people. It is love perfected in relationship. Sanctification is not simply private piety. It is a people formed in love. It is not in isolation. It is a community where love that bears with one another, love that seeks reconciliation, love that refuses contempt. I mean, this speaks to me as well, to not have a hardened heart with others, especially when we are looking at mind and conflict for forming character. The prayer of Jesus in John 17, that they may be one. This is not sentimental. This is not just a hopeful design of moving towards that telos. It is cruciform. It is a posture where there is unity forged through costly love. It is not just kumbaya good feelings. It is the hard work of reconciliation and unity. If holiness is love perfected, then peacemaking is not optional. It is a fruit of sanctification. So the question is not whether we will face conflict. The question is how our formation in holy love will shape our response. So let's now go sort of to the neuroscience of things. This is where some of my dissertation work comes from. It is really nerdy, which I absolutely adore. But human nervous system does not clearly distinguish between physical danger and social threat. So when someone senses their status slipping or their certainty shaken, their belonging questioned, or their sense of fairness violated, the body mobilizes. There's a response to that. And often before theological reasoning has time to engage. And so, what is happening in our brains when we walk into a room where the social dynamics are unsure to us, the same neural pathways are happening as when we encounter a bear in the woods. It is the same neural functioning. There is this fight, flight, freeze mode. And so before our theological reasoning kicks in, where we like, I need to be, um, give a sense of safety and belonging for others. I need to be kind. There needs to be a sense of mutuality, beloved community. Before any of those things happen, we have this fight, flight, freeze mode if we feel threatened. And to share David Rock, who is a neuroscientist that talks about this. He talks about in 5 different domains where we could feel threatened in social dynamics. And he calls it the SCARF model because SCARF spells scarf. And so, what are these 5 domains? The first is status, our relative importance to others, how we perceive our standing in a group. So, the question, am I valued here? Do others view me as important? And so, we see even in the auditorium, 650 women coming in, and some have come with a group, some have come alone. And so, women coming in and saying, do I belong here? Am I valued? Am I seen as important? So these are questions we may ask ourselves. Certainty, our ability to predict the future and feel secure about what's coming. So do I sense I know where we're headed? Do I know what the future holds? Do I know what is expected of me? So when we feel threatened in our sense of certainty, we will react. Fight, flight, freeze. Autonomy, our sense of control over events and choices. Do I have some control, choice, and freedom? Am I trusted to make decisions and own my choice? We have relatedness, our feeling of safety and connection with others. This idea of, do I belong here? Do I fit in? Am I part of the in crowd? And then lastly, fairness, our perception that exchanges and decisions are just and equitable. Do I sense the structure and the environment that I'm in, the systems, policies, the relationships? Do I feel that they are just and fair? So let's pause for a second and think about all the spaces that we're in. Maybe walking into a church board or your school or in a church or maybe even in your family home. I think about this with my own kids. Are there times when my mothering threatens my children's status or certainty or autonomy? And if they come back with eyes rolling or a defensive statement or something, can I blame them? Well, maybe I would, but can I blame them if I've set the culture of the room, of the family, where these threats are just flashing yellow flags for them? And then on the other hand, the people that we are leading, how are their different domains being threatened by your own leadership? So that's a question to ask. So, mining conflict. When we are thinking about the arguments that we're in, there are 3 layers that we need to consider. The first is positions. Most conflicts operate at the level of positions. Positions are loud, they are rigid, they sound absolute, they demand alignment. And so, for example, especially in this climate of feeling risk and unsafety, maybe some people in your congregation will say, we need armed guards. And maybe it's a non negotiable for them, it is a position that they hold. Underneath the positions are interests that are the underlying concerns, values, or goals that's driving this demand. Interests are what are being protected or accomplished. So, position, we need armed guards, and their interest is we just want safety. That is their interest. Needs. Beneath the positions and the interests are needs, and needs are deeper. They are this sense of relational longing, safety, dignity, belonging, identity, stability, meaning. Needs are the deeper human or relational requirements at stake. So let's go back to our example again. We need armed guards. That's the position. Interest, we want safety. But perhaps the deep need is we need our children to be secure, right? So when we argue at the level of positions, we entrench, like we dig in our heels. But when we listen at the level of needs, we humanize. So it's like we need armed guards. And for us to respond, I can't have guns in the church. We do not want that kind of climate. And there could be that butting of heads. But if somebody came to us and said, I just want my 6-month-old baby to be safe in the nursery, there is no room for butting heads. It's like, yes, let's think about the strategies together. So, this distinction between position and needs echoes both conflict transformation theory and the principles of compassionate communication, where needs are universal, but our strategies differ. So, agree on the needs and talk about and compromise with the strategies. Peacemaking is not convincing someone that their strategy is wrong. It is uncovering what sacred concern is driving at. Oh, let's say that one more time. Peacemaking is not convincing someone that their strategy is wrong. It is uncovering what sacred concern is driving it. Let me give you an example, and I hope this person isn't listening. I hardly doubt it. Not clergy and not a woman, but we had an AV person, and he would always have the live stream going at that portion when you said, go talk to your neighbor. And the mics were hot. And so people would be gathered around the microphone, not knowing, and talk, yeah, I just got into this huge fight with my husband, and da 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 da. Da." And me sharing with him, we can't do that anymore. We need to shut off the mics, even the camera during that time. And he just kind of not like non-committally said, yeah, okay. And to find a couple of weeks later that he would keep live streaming it. So I tried to get more credibility to my request and went to our lawyer and said, is this a liability issue? And he said, absolutely, it's a liability issue. So I went back to the AV guy. I don't like this is a liability issue. We need to shut this off. And I thought that was enough. And come a couple of months later, he's still playing the live feed, and the microphones are still hot. And I said, okay, we need to have a conversation. Why are you pushing back on this? And he said, I have family members that cannot come to church, and I want them to feel like they are part of the community. So that was the deep need. And so now we could talk about strategy. And so it is at that point when I said, okay, well, let's have people in the church go into the chat and start asking them questions and how are they doing and talk about what they did on the weekend. And so we came to a solution. But I had to uncover the position and maybe even the interest to get to his human need of that situation to come to mind that conflict. So in the workshop that I led yesterday in the face-to-face room, I did give a case study. Not really quite sure how we should navigate that, but I think maybe what we can do in your own communities back at home later on. You will get a QR code that goes to this slide deck, and you could go through this exercise with them. But it was a really interesting conversation in the room yesterday where somebody said, this is not imaginary. This is my exact situation where you are an associate pastor of a congregation. The current lead pastor is a respected man, faithfully led for many years. And after discernment, they announced that they are going to move to a co pastor model, but the congregation is simply not ready. Um, so people are saying that this feels like a dramatic structural shift, or we've never had co-pastors before. We need clear lines of authority, or this may confuse the congregation, or this feels rushed. And then in the parking lot at the meeting after the meeting, we have our church has always believed in male headship. This will cause families to leave. We are not sure this is biblically faithful. This could stabilize our giving and possibly risk closing down the church. And so we had people, so you sense the tension rising. Board meetings feel different. Side conversations increase. You notice yourself becoming more vigilant in the room as the associate pastor, and trust feels fragile. And so here are some prompts you can talk to with one another in your context. What are the board and congregations thinking? What about you as the female pastor? What about the shared leadership, the male pastor? And how can you move towards addressing the situation? So this QR code on this page gives you the different case studies and also the group prompts. But something that came out of conversation yesterday is that people said, it is the certainty. That is the domain that is being threatened here. And when people are threatened, they respond out of their natural instinct of fight, flight, and freeze. Um, and to note when minding conflict, when authority structures shift, and this is what's happening here in this case study, nervous systems mobilize. This is predictable, it is inevitable, uh, but it is not proof that someone is faithless. It is evidence that something feels unstable, right? We cannot point to someone and say, just trust God. Or even worse, God told us to do this, because then that's questioning their ability to have faith or their alignment of the will or desire of God. And so we need to create safe spaces then to have these conversations. Um, if holiness is love perfected in relationship, then conflict becomes one of the primary places our formation is tested. This is actually not something to have anxiety over per se. It is now an opportunity to disciple our people, to give them an understanding of why all of our denominations that's part of WHWC are egalitarian, meaning that we believe that God ordains and recognizes all levels of leadership for men and women. So it is an opportunity to teach on theology. So the question is not simply who is right. The question becomes, can I remain steady when multiple nervous systems are activated? Not just mine, everybody else is in the room. Can I tether belonging before I tether agreement? What would change in this scenario if belonging felt secure? That question, all of these questions reframes the whole entire exercise. Um, any thoughts on that, Robbie, before I go on?
I'm just thinking, I know I'm messing up. Our people are like, go sit in the camera. Because I have 4 little children, and like how and now like we, gentle parenting is a thing, but how like the whole model of that is self-regulation. Because if you can be regulated, then your children are better regulated. And when the impulse, like that's what I was hearing when you're like, not just my steadiness, but like the steadiness of others is like how different it is when I'm frustrated with my children. My children make me a better pastor, I think, is what I'm learning, right? Like I'm learning all these things in the parenting world that reflect is that when I'm very reactive and like I yell, then it just makes everything worse. But when I just take a deep breath, like even though my nervous system's like fight or flight, like because it does in parenting and in pastoring and in life and all of the things. But if instead I take like a deep breath and like even say to myself, like, you're safe, like everything's good, like how different that interaction with my children is.
Yeah.
Just from that steady, like you use the word steady, that steady, thoughtful response. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
And that's so important because neuroscience research says that you need to have a sense of safety and assurance and belonging in order to grow.
My therapist told me once, she says this is gonna be really silly because I struggle with anxiety, and I tell people that my second savior is Zoloft because it's, it's after Jesus because it really did like save me, right, from a lot of things. So no shame in that. Just putting that out there while we're talking about neuroscience and anxiety and trauma. Like, please don't feel shame. Like being regulated yourself matters. But my therapist was like, "It's gonna be really silly, Robbie, but, like, when you have those moments, like, you can even say, like, out loud because when you know" like, and this is for situations where, like, it really isn't unsafe, like, there are situations where it is legitimately unsafe, so to clarify. But situations where I'm not, with my kids, where I'm not really unsafe, but I get that neural firing, she's like, "You literally can just say out loud, 'Hello, anxiety. Thank you for trying to protect me. I appreciate that. I'm safe." And she goes, "I know that sounds really silly. Like, I know you feel real weird doing it, but, like, that helps your body to, like, like, it really helps you not just, like, emotionally kinda, it helps your whole body. Like, there's this whole connection." And I was like, "It is weird." And then I did it, and I was like, "Yeah, this does work." And it does feel weird, but it really does, like, help, um, in those situations. And I've done it in situations where my status has been questioned,
Right.
where I'm struggling with pastors that are questioning my authority because they'll say like, "Well, you're a young woman," right? Which I'm 41, so I don't know how yet. I don't know when that stops happening. Yeah, apparently like forever, maybe until I'm 8. But um, like I kind of get that dismissiveness and I get that fight or flight feeling. And I have like had to go back then into these situations where I'm like sitting in my car doing, like, breath prayers
Yeah.
on the way into that situation, like, breathing in, like, "The Lord is my shepherd," and then breathing out, "I will not want," or, like, some refrain like that to remind myself that, like, to get that nervous body, mind, spirit alignment. Yeah, this is really
Yeah, there were a lot of questions yesterday about that. Like, how do I regulate? And I don't know if it's in this the what are this slides afterwards. But there was questions from the room of how do you then regulate yourself? And sometimes we can reason out and say, okay, you're safer than you feel. And, as Robbie mentioned, there are some spaces that are not safe, and you should book it and get out of there as fast as you can. But in spaces, in certain social dynamics, especially when you're at church or you're leading a space, sometimes our trauma doesn't give us that ability to reason because the neural pathways are so entrenched. And so then the question is, well, then how do you regulate? And so there are some things that we can do to kind of jar us out of the fight and fight and flight freeze mode where your amygdala is totally activated. And so there are things like touching the back of your neck, right? There's something actually biologically, physiologically true about this being able to calm you, or even an ice cube that kind of startles you out of that fight, flight, freeze mode, or even touching your forehead is something. Box breathing,
Did you
breathing
know
in.
that that's a tip for labor? They tell you to hold ice cubes. Did you know that?
I thought that was to focus the pain somehow else, but
It's like, yeah, I think it's that, like, that to help you, like, because when you are in labor, like, they tell you to relax, like, that's really great advice, that's really hard to do, but, like, if you don't relax, it makes your labor harder, it's so that's one of the things they actually recommend is, like, if you hold
ice cube.
an ice cube, it helps you shift out of that fight and flight to that. There you go, look at that.
There were a couple of people that mentioned that sometimes when their nervous systems are activated, they wiggle their toes,
Hmm.
right? So to wiggle your toes and you get kind of jarred out of, you kind of are more aware of your body and then, interesting. So let's go on. All right. Guidelines for how to have difficult conversations. Um, this is what I've used in a lot of peace building processes to teach communities that are going through tension. First of all, trust in God. Make every effort to see through the eyes of those with whom you disagree. Allow others to define themselves. Don't assume you understand their position. How many times I've gone into a room with someone that doesn't know me at all, but might know of me, and they say, "Well, I don't agree with anything that you believe," and I'm like, how do you know what I believe? Right. And so there's certain assumptions that are made. Speak honestly. Like sometimes we believe, oh, just kind of keep the peace. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. But communities undermine when people don't say what they really think about difficult issues. It just remains to be an elephant in the room and it impacts conversations, creativity, all of that. Don't assume the absence of common ground. I mean, we are the people of God. We believe, if we're talking about conflicts within the church or a spiritual community, we all love and worship the same God. Of course, there's common ground. Recognize that different positions are often better understood as points on a continuum than as polar opposites. Refrain from expressing convictions in ways that others could find offensive. Like, for example, Christians would never vote that way. Um, Focus on issues without questioning the motives uh, or their intelligence or integrity of those who think differently. And something that I really emphasize, don't try to conquer. The goal is not to win or prove someone right or wrong. It is to love better. That is, if you're at the table and you want to reconcile, that has to be the goal then, right? Not to conquer. All right. So I don't know how much more time we have. Yeah, we're good. Okay. So I just wanted to share 3 takeaways. Takeaway number 1, and we talked about regulating, but regulate before you respond. So before you speak, do whatever it takes. You can find online, on YouTube or something, ways to self-regulate. So to pause, to count to 3. We teach our kids that all the time. To breathe. Name the likely threatened domain. Is my status being threatened or my certainty, fairness? Name it. It's exactly what what your therapist is saying. Um, and you cannot shepherd a dysregulated room from a dysregulated body. It will just feed onto each other. So sanctification, it includes nervous system awareness. Holiness includes embodied wisdom, the wisdom that is in our bodies. What is our body saying to us? How do we regulate in a room so that we can respond out of a spirit of goodness? Second takeaway, the tethered belonging question. So before asking who is right, the question should be, what would it look like to tether belonging to this conversation before tethering agreement? Will we choose to commit to one another, to have commitment to the relationship before forcing or coercing the other to agree? Belonging is not agreement. Belonging is regulated presence across difference. Isn't that interesting? Regulated presence, that someone that disagrees with everything that is important to you, that person could come into the room and that both of you have bodies that are regulated because we are confident of our care for one another. In polarized congregations, the deepest fear is not doctrinal error, it is expulsion, that they are then put on a bad list, that they are canceled, that they are sent away. You do not belong here. That is the underlying fear that covers almost all the tension that happens in spiritual communities. When people feel secure in belonging, they can loosen their grip on positions. So, do we as leaders set a culture where there is belonging? That is parakaleo. That is holy love embodied. All right, so this third one, before we get into the third one, I do want to ask you to have an open heart with this third one. Peacekeeping versus peace building. Sometimes, as people that attend church or are part of a spiritual community, we choose to stay silent because we want to keep the peace. We don't want to hurt their feelings. We don't want to ruffle feathers. We don't want that our disagreements to cause disruption. But we must ask ourselves, whose peace are we keeping? Whose peace are we keeping? Because in many systems and environments, the ones whose peace is out of reach are those on the margins, those that are the most vulnerable, those who are the very ones Jesus calls us to love and serve. So peace building often calls us to disrupt status quo. That is the peace we're trying to keep, to disrupt that, flip tables, to set new ones that are more radically inclusive and hospitable. And we are called to be peacemakers, not peacekeepers. So there is a resource, and perhaps you will not agree with everything that's on this resource, but it starts with a declaration of peace building, really costly ways that we need to shift our thinking to build peace for all people. That is the peace of God. That is God's peace. It is shalom for all, not just the people in the center. And so reading this declarative statement might trigger your amygdala, might trigger that instant fight, freeze inclination. But I encourage you to take a deep breath, read it if you feel like God is calling you to sign the declaration. But what is more important in this website is that it gives you a number of tools and resources we can use to peace build in the cultural moment that we're in today. And so you do not have to agree with everything, but remember, we are not on polar opposite sides of a spectrum. What can you agree with? How can God use this to open up your hearts and minds of you as a leader or as your people, your congregation, to see the circumstances in which some people are not experiencing peace that you are, and how God is calling you to stand in solidarity. So at this time, I don't know if there's any questions out there. Oh, Robbie's got one.
I have a question. So you were just talking about, I think we're all kind of familiar with this idea of fight, flight, freeze. But in recent years, there's a fourth that you didn't really address, which is fawn.
Yeah.
And I think in particular for women,
That one.
can
That is a good point. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what, because for those that haven't experienced that, because I think we know fight is right,
Right.
battle, flight is run away, freeze is like you just stay there, you know what to do. But there is this fourth piece
There
or
is.
discovering that's fawn. And I think that women, for whatever reason, and maybe this is just me observation, right? My experience is that that is also something that happens in particular. Yeah, I mean, in particular in spiritual spaces, that they don't do those three things, so they're not recognizing it as a trauma response because they're doing fawning instead. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, and probably this is something that I'm really prone to, especially as an Asian woman, um, where I was raised to submit to and respect authority. That is just part of our culture. That I sometimes find myself in spaces where I feel like something doesn't feel right, and my inclination to fight is kind of muted, or I don't have the option to flight, to run away from that space, or to freeze because I need to be activated and mobilized because I'm leading something, or being led for that matter. And so I turn to this fawn response where it's like, "Oh, you are amazing," or "You are such a great leader. I would follow you," even though I've experienced harm to my own body in the ways that this person is leading. And it's again a trauma response, in order to avoid, as our bodies are feeling unsafe, to move into safe spaces. And we talk about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn mode. And Robbie mentioned this earlier, that that there's no shame in it. It is our bodies that are our bodies were designed by God to protect ourselves. And sometimes past experiences are telling us, we need to be protected, we need to be safe. And there are times, as Robbie mentioned, we say, thank you, body, for all the ways that you have protected our person, especially in the past. This is not that moment now. This is a place where you are safer than you feel. And God, I just sense this from the Lord in so many spaces. Christine, you are safer than you feel. Um, and this idea of through the strength. Oh, I'm going to talk about that in a second in my last slide. But I do want to note one thing. There are spaces that are really not safe. There are spaces where this call to tether to one another, across lines of difference, where that is not God's call for you. There are some spaces where you need to cut off the relationship, especially if it's abusive, if there is harm to your person, and there's no uh, uh, sorrow or repentance on their side, or remorse. That is not a relationship where the Lord wants you in. And so I am talking more about, across age, cultural, ethnic, ideological, political platforms, like differences in that space. So I do want to clarify that.
I think this is in some ways, and maybe it's not, but in some ways, this is a little bit of a cultural shift. I think in the church, a good and healthy one, right? Some of that is like my parents are in their 80s, and so they just never talked about anything, right? Like we just never talked about anything because that's just what you did. There's a reason they're called the silent generation, right? Like they just don't talk about anything. Um, so like I think that I don't know if it was like conflict avoidance or whatever, but like for the sake of unity, right? We talk about this
Yeah.
unity of things. So in some ways, this is a bit of a culture shift that we have to, as pastors, even just teach our people to be first comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? But also, I always tell we pass a peace at church every Sunday in my congregation. And so, like, it would very easily become like greeting time, right? Like, it could. But I always introduce it this way, like, we are not called. I say, it was funny that you said this because I say, we're not called to be peacekeepers. It says, "Blessed are the peacemakers," and makers is an active word, which means we have to practice and do the work of peace. And so I say, this is not a greeting time. We are practicing building and making peace here in this space. amongst our community in an environment that hopefully we're creating a culture that's safer and so that then in this world that obviously needs peacemakers, we are more equipped. So I'd love to hear, Christine, some of your thoughts on maybe some of those other practices as leaders that are trying to change
Mm-hmm.
the culture of their church, that maybe they're moving into a healthier space. Not just like, because I think our reaction, we want to, this feels sometimes like a lot of damage control. But what do we do if we have hopefully, or we eventually will have a healthier congregation to preventative, thoughtful, peacemaking cultural movements
Yeah.
in order that when those hard things happen, the automatic response starts to become, we can be comfortable with being uncomfortable and walking and making peace.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
So, some discipleship measures. I mean, that is an opportunity for discipleship, right?
Yeah.
Let's say we're around a board table and somebody voices something that is disagreeing with someone else. Stop and pause there. Repeat that. Thank you so much, Robbie, for being vulnerable enough to voice that. We really do need to put things out on the table if we're going to be an effective leadership team. And then this culture of mining conflict. Tell the board members ahead of time. For example, if we're talking about a boardroom, to say there's no longer going to be sacred elephants in the room that we don't talk about. We need to, if we are going to be authentically collaborating, working together, authentically tethered to one another, these things need to be talked about in the open. And it's this whole culture of mining conflict, mining for gold, right? Mining for diamonds, in times of conflict and tension. And so to normalize it, to even celebrate might be too strong of a word, but to affirm it, affirm people saying things out loud. And then doing the work, I mean, even through these slides, right? Doing the work of position, interest, and needs,
Yeah.
doing the work of scarf models and say, okay, what domain is being triggered here for you? Let me affirm you are important. Your status in this boardroom is important. So talk about the neural level of what is happening as we talk about these things, but it has to be normalized.
Can I share a story about my own
Please.
daily? And it's actually WHWC related. So when I've been on the planning team, right, for 2 conference cycles. So then I stepped in this director position. And I was like, when I came into this position, I was I was struggling with anxiety. This is pre-Zoloft, right? Because I watched my son has epilepsy. I watched him have like a tonic-clonic seizure, and it was very traumatic. And then I became hypervigilant all the time because we're watching him, right? So I step into this position after the wonderful Suji, struggling with my own imposter syndrome, which I think in and of itself is sometimes a trauma response in some ways. So we could probably write a dissertation on that. And so then we just like I was here in Minneapolis for site visit, and I'm like pitching the idea of Minneapolis to everybody. And because when I get anxious and when the things are loud, I just talk. So I talked over everybody. I ran over everybody on my team. I'm driving home back to Chicago, and Christy calls me. And she's like, I don't know how to say this nicely. And I said to her, I don't need you to say things nicely. I need you to make me better. And she says, I don't know if I can work with you. Because we need to be collaborative. And she's like, I don't know what happened. She's like, but you're a person who values collaboration. You're always looking for who is not in the room, what just happened. And I said, you're absolutely right, Christy. You're absolutely right. You're right. I interrupted people. I talked over people. I trampled over everybody's ideas. And it has nothing to do with you or this team. It is all I was dysregulated. It was all the noise in my head. It was all my own insecurities. And how I should have gone in is said, everybody, I'm struggling with imposter syndrome, because everybody in that room would have been like, us too, right?
Yeah.
Let me be vulnerable for a moment. Let me say these things. and this is your leadership, right? Like Christy works on your district, is that Christy has learned to be honest and forthright. And so she just says,
Yeah.
this is not, we're just going to confront this. And I went, you are 100% right. So then I was able to go back, repent, and say, I am wrong. Like, I talked all over you. I'm not making excuses. This is why I did it. Now I'm being vulnerable. This is what's going on in my life. That's not an excuse. But I do want you to know this is the reality of where I am right now, but I will do better. And then from that time on, the way that we worked was different. And so then we were able, but I think for both of us, the ability for me to say, I don't need you to be nice to me. I need you to help me be holy.
Yeah.
And her ability to just say what needed to be said, is a different ethos.
Yeah.
Right. That's not peacekeeping. We have to go through this conflict. And it wasn't that big of a conflict.
No, right. Yeah.
Right. But it's still, this conference would have been a lot different if we didn't have that conversation. Would it have happened at all? I don't know. Right. She probably would have quit on me. But like, I think that has really illustrated and cemented to me that like beautiful, good parakaleo relationships comes from vulnerability and honesty and a commitment to walking through the difficult conversations, whether they're seemingly small or huge, because that's what makes us better and holy and good. And that's not really a question, but I just wanted to it out.
And Christy, I don't know if you're going to be watching this later on, but I mean, she does that for me too. We all need a Christy in our lives.
She's great.
But what's so good about it is that our sense of belonging is so strong with one another, and I'm sure with you and her, that even if she shares these things, it's like, but I feel secure in you. Tell me. And so that would revolutionize leadership. If we had that kind of relationship with each of the people we're leading, where you would welcome critique, feedback, on both ways, right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
And
that's like perfect.
And then the thing that happened in this conversation as I'm driving home, talking to her, is that when I finally got vulnerable and like shared with her what was going on in my own mind, was then not only these really words, but then she poured over me, there's no reason for you to feel like you don't belong. You are called to this work. You're gifted in this work. And so all those insecurities that were causing me to have that, like she then was the person that was also saying, let me build you up. Let me encourage you.
And can I say that that's actually part of the work as well? That if you know someone that has a background where their status is always feeling threatened because of some trauma in their past, then as a leader, you are called to overcompensate and have that sense of status or certainty or whatever it might be, that when it's feeling threatened, that you work overtime to make sure that that space, that domain feels safe for them. So that's really
We did get a
important.
question from Debbie. She's asking what imposter syndrome is because I use that word.
Oh gosh, please. I mean, yes, I mean, we all experience that. But
Yeah, it really is. It's really just the sense. I think this is really important for us to know, kind of this, just have language for probably what a lot of us feel. It's just this idea that like, I don't actually belong here. I don't belong in the positions that I have. I don't belong behind the pulpit, or I don't belong as conference director. I'm not good enough. Like, I'm just pretending, like I'm playing.
Or if they really knew me, they
really
wouldn't
knew
say
they
that.
wouldn't want me to do this, right? Because I'm just not good enough. And I've talked to many, many women here, like workshop leaders, that are saying to me, and I've had a few of them come to me and I'm like, how are you excited about your workshop? They're like, I'm feeling imposter syndrome. And I say to them, well, talk to me about that. Like, why are you feeling that? Like, what is this? And they're like, well, I just don't know. Like, I'm not done with my doctorate degree yet. So why am I? And I'm like, okay, but like, you started it and you have things to say, you have things to offer, right? But it is this sense of, and I think in some ways, like imposter syndrome comes from this trauma of constantly feeling questioned, because we are questioned at times.
Yeah.
It can come from that place, as well at times.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah, I also think though, imposter syndrome could be a superpower. Because when you
How about
have
that?
imposter syndrome, you just desperately lean on God and say, God, this has to be you, because if it's just me, I'm just going to fail. And so I know a lot of women that are powerful in their leadership because they are so committed to prayer. Every moment, every decision, every discernment is through the power of the Holy Spirit because they feel like they are inadequate. And so there is that.
Debbie shared one more thought for you. She said, I'm learning more about being dysregulated and how it presents itself. I've also learned that just because a difficult situation is over, the nervous system doesn't know that, and it keeps acting like the issues are still there.
Yeah, so there's a number of practices that we can do. I mean, therapy and yes, medication,
Yeah.
right? We can talk it out with someone. Saying things out loud and being seen and heard actually helps the over functioning part of our brain to kind of calm down. And so there's just a number of ways that we can bring ourselves down again after. And sometimes it's even after a good thing.
Yeah.
Like, Robbie, I would imagine come the next couple days after you go home, you're just gonna feel down and almost even depressed.
This is a big part of conferences, and I'll make sure to address it tonight with people, but it's really important to have aftercare
Yes.
after these big, like, mountaintop moments with God, because we're going back to the valley, and it happens, like, when I was a youth pastor, I would always prep my youth group kids, because if you've ever been to youth camp, they have these big it's like Thursday night or whatever, altar calls, and they're all crying, and it's just always happens because God always is faithful, right? And I would always have to prepare myself for aftercare of my youth group kids, because then, like, post that would be like, whoosh, like this big drop, and walking through. So that's really an important part of the work we do, is not just walking through the moment, but this aftercare of showing up with people, through that. Whether it's a big high or a big low, like, that is a really, really important thing. Like, we're all gonna have to check in with one another, right, in the next few weeks.
Which is even more important to get a membership, right? These affinity groups to, you know, paraclete together. I don't know if you can say that, but I do want to give one last word. You are not called to eliminate conflict. You are called to be formed in love within it and invite other people to be formed in love in that conflict as well. And also, holiness is not fragile, it is courageous enough to stay. And so, as you are being sanctified, it gives you enough courage to stay in tough spaces and to love radically, to be radically hospitable, and to tether to one another in tension and conflict.
Yeah, thanks for leading us so well and modeling this. Like, that's I think it's one thing to talk about content and say, like, "I'm working on my dissertation on this," but there's, like, this lived theology, like, that's really important, is that this is not something that Christine is just teaching you. It's something she is a student of, but also a practitioner of. She's actively doing this work, in her congregations, with the pastors on her district. She's modeled this beautifully for me. She's modeled it for everybody that interacts with her, just this peaceful, thoughtful way to make us better. So we appreciate you, Christine.
Thanks, Robbie.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. And make sure to look at those slides and come back at 2:30, right? For we have a workshop in Spanish for you. That's gonna be amazing. And if you don't speak Spanish, you have a couple hours to learn. So, work really hard, at that. But thank you so much for joining us on live stream. We love you all. We're praying for you. We're so glad that you're here with us, even if from a distance. The spirit extends beyond
Absolutely.
the walls here. So
Mhm.
we're grateful for you. So come back at 2:30.
Bye, everyone.